Hi friends! Welcome to a Miss Mindy Minute. This is a time where you as a student and I as a school counselor can work on what can sometimes be the hardest things. Hard things. During our time together, we will work on ways that you can make your heart and your actions and your choices to mirror the heart of Jesus. And it's a really big deal that I get to join you today in your classroom because I love coming into your school and getting the opportunity to talk to you about all kinds of things, about little things, about big things, all the things. But today we're actually going to specifically talk about little things and big things. And I've brought a visitor here with me today. I want you to meet little Squeal Deal. Now, she will squeal all over the place. And she squeals about the littlest deals. She squeals over deals that are unimportant. She squeals over deals that don't matter, that are harmless, that are accidents, and little Squeal Deal does it, guess what? For things that she can solve on her own. Sometimes she does it just to get others in trouble. Do you think my little Squeal Deal has many friends? What do you think? No, you're right. All little Squeal Deal's classmates are scared to be her friend because they're afraid that she'll try on purpose to get them in trouble, right? So they worry that she'll tattle to her teacher about something they're doing, and they're even concerned that she'll squeal when they do something on accident. Little Squeal Deal isn't the only one that has this issue. Let's read a read-aloud book about a whole classroom of squealers. It's called Don't Squeal Unless It's a Big Deal, A Tale of Tattletales, and it's written by Jeannie Franz and illustrated by Jackie Urbanovich. Ready? Here we go.
Don't Squeal Unless It's a Big Deal, A Tale of Tattletales. Written by Jeannie Franz Ransom, illustrated by Jackie Urbanovic, and read for you by Mrs. Spahn. There were 19 students in Mrs. McNeil's class and 19 tattletales. It all started when Jessica trotted up to Mrs. McNeil's desk. "Peter pulled my pigtail." "That must have hurt," Mrs. McNeil said. "Did you tell Peter that?" Jessica nodded. Mrs. McNeil said, "Let's see what Peter has to say." Peter dragged his hooves all the way up to Mrs. McNeil's desk. "Jessica says you pulled her pigtail," Mrs. McNeil said. "I did not," Peter said. "Yes, you did," Jessica said. "You both have the right to say how you feel," Mrs. McNeil said. "You also have the right to feel safe and comfortable at school. Rules like keep your hooves to yourself make that easier to do." Mrs. McNeil added, "But since Jessica's tail is still attached and Peter doesn't look particularly dangerous at the moment, I think it's safe to go back to your desks now." Jessica stomped. Peter snorted. Mrs. McNeil started humming The Farmer and the Doll. Mrs. McNeil had just lifted her cup of slop for a quick slurp when Stephen trotted up to her. "Rachel took my pink marker and she won't give it back. I even asked her 2 times. Mrs. McNeil put down her cup. "Stephen, I'm so glad you tried to fix the problem yourself first by talking to Rachel," she said. "Maybe her ears aren't working too well today. Let's find out." "Stephen can't find his pink marker," Mrs. McNeil said. "Have you seen it?" "I gave it back," Rachel cried. "I can't find my pink marker." "That's because you used it all up," Peter said. "You're always drawing pictures of pigs." Rachel sniffed. "For your information, those are pictures of moi. What am I supposed to do? Color myself green?" "You know our class rule, Rachel," said Mrs. McNeil. "If you want to borrow something, ask first. It's how friends treat friends and stay friends." Mrs. McNeil had just taken her first sip of slop when Megan announced, "Frankie called Sookie a fat sow." Mrs. McNeil had to gulp her slop before she could speak. She cleared her throat and hoped she didn't have a corn kernel in her teeth. "I'm glad you know our class rules so well," Mrs. McNeil said. "You're right, we don't call each other names. Also, we don't try to fix our problems that don't belong to us," Mrs. McNeil said. "I know you're trying to help, but if Frankie and Sookie have a problem, it's their job to fix it. And if they can't, it's my job as the teacher to help them. Your job," Mrs. McNeil added, "is to take care of you. That's the most important job you can have." Megan danced a jig all the way back to her desk. But then the stampede started. Robbie breathed on me. Jonathan ripped my paper. Emily called my desk a pigsty. Laura looked at me. Jeremy's grunting and I can't concentrate. Sam's picking his snout. The students had practically worn a path to Mrs. McNeil's desk and worn out her patience when she stood up. The students sat down. "Before we go to lunch, I think we need to add a new rule to our list," Mrs. McNeil said. "A very important rule," she added. "Can anyone tell me what squealing is?" Students started squealing like their tails were stuck in a gate. "Not that kind of squealing," Mrs. McNeil shouted, waving a cowbell. When the class was quiet, Mrs. McNeil continued. "Squealing," she said, "is my special word for tattling, and you know what that is." Some students looked at the floor. Some looked at each other. Some looked at the ceiling like they'd suddenly seen something interesting up there. Mrs. McNeil started writing on the board. "Here's our new class rule," Mrs. McNeil said. "What does it mean?" Jessica asked. "I'm glad you asked," Mrs. McNeil said. "To squeal on someone means you are going to tell a grown-up when someone does or says something you don't like instead of telling that person first. Most problems that happen between kids are kid-sized problems that they can work out themselves," Mrs. McNeil said, "usually by talking, listening, and helping each other." "But sometimes," Mrs. McNeil said, "something happens that's bigger than a kid-sized problem. Like when someone is hurt or in danger, or when a person is hurting you, or hurting a pet, or hurting something that doesn't belong to them, or that belongs to all of us. That's when it's okay to squeal, because it's a big deal. When it's a big deal, it's an emergency. That's when you need to hoof it and get help from a grown-up." Oscar raised his hoof. "I know it's not a big deal, Mrs. McNeil, but I'm hungry enough to eat a haystack." Mrs. McNeil laughed. "Me too. I'm sure we'll get to practice what we've learned when we get back." But that afternoon, Mrs. McNeil had barely closed the classroom gate when Katie said, "Jenny hogged the rope swing at recess." Mrs. McNeil pointed to the board. "Remember what we just learned?" Katie nodded. "Then you know you need to tell Jenny first about the problem." "Tell me what?" Jenny yelled from across the room. "That you were hogging the swing," Katie yelled back. "You never asked for a turn," Jenny said. "I didn't get a turn," Jeremy said. "Not my fault," Peter said. "Not this time." "It's Carolyn's fault," Sookie said. "Who's Carolyn?" Oscar asked. "She's not even in our class," Frank said. Thump! Mrs. McNeil had disappeared. "Are you okay?" Megan asked. Mrs. McNeil didn't answer. Her eyes were closed. Her tail was limp. One ear had something red on it. "Quick! Call the office! Tell them it's an emergency! Somebody get the nurse! Somebody tell Mrs. Hamlin next door!" Later that afternoon, the students visited Mrs. McNeil in the nurse's office. "We're sorry we squealed so much today," Jessica said. "We didn't mean to make you mad," Peter said. "It's all our fault," Katie cried. "It wasn't anybody's fault," Mrs. McNeil said. "It was an accident. I slipped on some spilled slop. It must have been quite a mess." We thought you had exploded, Jeremy said. It was pretty gross, Oscar added. Maybe you'd better not eat that stuff anymore, Rachel said. You need to take care of yourself. It sounds like all of you took care of the problem, Mrs. McNeil said. Everyone says you knew just what to do when I got hurt. Only because you're such a good teacher, Jessica said. And you're such good learners, Mrs. McNeil said. We still need some practice, Katie said. We all do when we learn something new, Mrs. McNeil said. So let's practice. Don't squeal unless it's a big deal.
Would you want to be in a classroom full of squealers? No way. Me neither. I wouldn't. In fact, Paul from the New Testament had to deal with a bunch of squealers too. He wrote, "We hear that some people from your group do nothing but busy themselves in other people's lives. We command those people to work quietly." In other words, Paul was saying that this bunch of people were tattling about little deals. They didn't learn the difference between big deals and little deals, but you can too. So there in your classroom, you have lots and lots of little deals that happen every single day. Little deals are things that bother and hurt feelings. So here's some examples, like little deals that are ones that happen when someone else is whistling loudly in your ear, or maybe sits in your spot on the rug, or maybe cuts in line at the drinking fountain, or bumps you by accident, or maybe even says, "I'm telling." Those are little deals. Little deals are things that when someone is unkind or won't share or won't take turns or is not following directions, right? Those are little deals. Can you help think of some other little deals for me? What do you think? Tell them to little squeal deal right now. All right. So little deals don't need to be told to an adult. This would be called squealing or tattling. Tattling is trying to get someone in trouble when the behavior is on accident, when the behavior is unimportant, when it's a harmless situation, or when you can solve it on your own. Little Squeal Deal needs to know that when she tells an adult on these things, she is squealing or tattling, right? Telling an adult about important big deals is something you do need to do. So big deals are for getting someone out of trouble when the behavior is on purpose, when it's important, when it's a dangerous situation, or when you need help from an adult to solve it. When a big deal happens, it's an emergency and you need to go get a grown-up right away. So, can you share some other big deals? What are some of your ideas? Ready? Tell them to little Squeal Deal right now. Good. So sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference between a big deal and a little deal. And that's why we need to get our detective kit out. I brought mine with me. Did you bring yours with you? Here, let's get an imaginary one out. Let's put it on together. Now, you put on your pretend detective coat. I happen to bring my detective trench coat with me, but we're going to have to be deal detectives, right? So put your detective coat on. Are you getting your imaginary detective coat out? All right, I'm going to button up my detective coat button. Are you buttoning yours up? Good. Okay. Now, every good deal detective needs a detective hat. Did you bring your pretend detective hat? All right, I brought my real one, so I'm going to put it on. You put your deal detective hat on. You got it on? Good. And then finally, every deal detective needs a microscope or needs a spyglass, all right? Did you bring your pretend one? I brought my pretend one. Do you have yours? I've got my pretend magnifying glass. So we are set. We're going to be deal detectives, and we are ready to do the detective work to decide whether a situation is a little deal that could be squealing, or if a situation is a big deal that needs reporting. Okay? So let's try some, and I have my big deal, little deal bucket right here. Okay. He called me a name once. He called me a name once. What do you think, deal detectives? Is that a little deal or a big deal? He called me a name once. What do you think, little squeal deal? I do. I agree. I think that if you told an adult for that, it would be squealing, and here's why. He called you a name that's unkind and might have hurt your feelings, but it's nothing you can't solve on your own. So if someone calls you a name once, you would say, that hurts my feelings. Please don't call me names. And you solved it, right? Let's try another one. Okay. All right, how about this one? She scribbled on my paper. She scribbled on my paper. What do you think there, deal detectives? What do you think? Is that a little deal that you can handle on your own, or is that a big deal that needs reporting to an adult? What do you think? Okay, little squeal deal. What do you think? Is that a little deal that you can handle on your own, or a big deal? I think it's a little deal that if you told an adult, it would be squealing. You're right. She scribbled on my paper. Is that a little deal? Yeah, that's a little deal. You can easily solve that yourself by going and getting a fresh sheet of paper, right? You don't need to tell an adult on that. Okay. Let's try something else. Okay, here's one. She is injured and bleeding. She is injured and bleeding. What do you think, deal detectives? Is that a little deal that you can handle by yourself, or is that a big deal that you need an adult's help with? Yeah, I agree. What do you think, Squeal Deal? Yes, that is a big deal when someone is injured and hurting and bleeding. That needs an adult to help solve, and it's an emergency. Good, deal detectives. You are doing so good. Okay, let's try this one. Okay. She threw paper on the floor. She threw paper on the floor. Is that a little deal that you can handle by yourself, or is that a big deal that needs reporting? What do you think? Good, deal detectives. I agree with you. Little squeal deal. What do you think? She threw paper on the floor. Is that a little deal or a big deal? Yeah, I think that is a little deal that if you told an adult, it would be squealing. You're absolutely right. Because someone throwing paper on the floor, that's probably against classroom rules, but is it your job to hold the classroom rules for others? No, that's teacher's job, right? You are only in charge of you and your choices. Good. Okay, let's do another one. Oh, here is a good one. Okay. He won't stop kicking Sam. He won't stop kicking Sam. What do you think, deal detectives? Do you think that is a little deal that you can handle on your own, or is that a big deal that needs an adult to help? What do you think? Absolutely. What do you think, Squeal Deal? Oh, she's not sure. Let's help her. Okay, so when someone is kicking or hurting someone on purpose over and over, that is hurtful and unkind behavior that needs an adult to help, right? So you would not be tattling or squealing. You would be reporting that situation because you need an adult's help. Let's try one more. Okay, here we go. He stuck his tongue out at me. He stuck his tongue out at me. Is that a big deal that needs reporting, or is that a little deal that you can fix on your own? What do you think, deal detectives? Yes, I think so too. I think that is a little deal. Well, what do you think, Squeal Deal? Yes, if you told an adult about that situation, it would be squealing. You're absolutely right, because someone sticking their tongue out at you might hurt your feelings, but It's something that you can just ignore and walk away. You can solve it on your own. I think sometimes it's easy to tell the difference between reporting and tattling, but I also think that sometimes there's a tricky piece when you want to squeal about a little deal, but you have to keep yourself from telling, right? So, Squeal Deal, I'm going to give you some ideas, 4 of them actually, or how if you're tempted to squeal, and tattletale, how you can stop yourself. Are you ready, little Squeal Deal? Okay, count with me. Here's number 1. If you're tempted to squeal and tattletale, you should, number 1, ignore. Don't look at the person who's bothering you. Don't listen to them. Don't talk to them. Just ignore them. Okay, little Squeal Deal? All right, good. All right. Tip number 2, if you are wanting to squeal, but you know that it's a little deal, you should scooch or walk away. Scooch or walk away. You can move away from the person who's bothering you, or move your body so that you're not sitting or standing near them. Okay, little Squeal Deal? Okay, tip number 3, if you're tempted to squeal but it's a little deal, point your shoulders up to the sky and say, oh well, okay? Doing that is going to actually signal from your body to your brain that it is really a little deal. So let's do it together. Ready? On the count of 3, you're going to point your shoulders up to the sky and say, oh well. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, well, right? Okay, that's tip number 3 if you're tempted to squeal and it's a little deal. Tip number 4, point both of your thumbs toward you and say, I'm in charge of me. Ready? Let's do it together on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm in charge of me. Your only job is to make sure that you are following the directions and following the rules, not anybody else. Grown-ups are in charge of giving reminders to others when they are needed. So, you've got 4 tips for how to deal when you are tempted to squeal, but it's just a little deal. And I think you've got it, little Squeal Deal. Remember, it takes practice to learn how to detect a little deal from a big deal. But if you use these tips, you're going to get the hang of it. That's all for today's Miss Mindy Minute. Until next time, bye-bye.